Hello everybody and welcome back to Dollar Tree Dinners. I am here at the General of Dollars and today we're going to try to see if we can eat for an entire week with $21 from Dollar General. It is Saturday, so I have my trusty $5 off a $25 purchase, so that means I have $26 to spend. The reason I picked $21 is because you have to spend this $25 before tax, and so I felt like giving myself the extra dollar made a little bit more sense than trying to get as close to $20 as I possibly could. I'm hoping to be able to come up with as many flavorful and unique meals out of this $21 as I possibly can. It's not really gonna be the healthiest. $21 is not a lot of food to eat the most balanced and nutritious meals. I think you can understand that. If you only had $20 to put towards your groceries every week, then if you're trying to eat healthy, you're probably going to be hungry. Dollar General is not the cheapest place to shop, but a lot of times it's what somebody has access to. And by using that $5 off coupon, you can make Dollar General prices a little bit more in line with other stores. For example, I have already mapped out my grocery list that I'm going to be buying for the most part, but when I import that list into Walmart's app, for example, it came out to $21. So the coupon makes Dollar General prices a little bit more competitive in general. So with that being said, let's go shopping at Dollar General and see what we can get for $21. So as I mentioned, I did go in with a list, so I knew exactly what I was going to get and how much it was all going to cost. I started with a half gallon of milk for $2.70. A dozen eggs were $3.50. Eggs were expensive and I almost didn't get them, but I did need them. Margarine for $1.50. Bologna for $1.50. These hot dogs were $1.50, but these other hot dogs were $1.75, and they looked a lot better to me, so I spent the extra quarter. Now on to dry goods. 2 pounds of rice for $1.65, 1 pound of dry pinto beans for $1, a big jar of chicken bouillon for $2.50, dry potato flakes for $3, 2 pounds of flour for $1.25, a loaf of bread for $1.50. Frozen vegetables were $1.50, so I got 2 bags of mixed vegetables, and I had $1 and some change left, so I got a $1 bag of potato chips. We've got the haul, and the total came out to $21.06. So here's what the entire haul looks like laid out, and normally I would only use oil, salt, and pepper. But because we have a lot of unprepared foods, I am going to use 2 seasoning mixes. I picked Cajun and salt-free garlic and herb. Both of these are from Dollar Tree. And 2 sauces. I picked hot sauce and mustard. The mustard I mostly picked for the bologna sandwiches, and the hot sauce is general purpose. Adding these items will cost no more than $5, and they're just for flavor. It's almost 11 and I just got home from Dollar General, so I'm quite hungry, and these are unprepared foods. They're going to take a little bit of time to prep and things like that. So we're going to keep lunch today relatively simple. I am just going to skip ahead to lunch because it's almost lunchtime anyways, and we're just going to go ahead and get it started with a bologna sandwich. So definitely not the most exciting meal to start this off with, but you guys know me, it will get more interesting as we go along. And I got the chips for the days that I do have a bologna sandwich. I am anticipating on having this about 3 times. There's enough that I can have 2 slices of bologna on each sandwich. And I could take the time to fry the bologna, but like I said, I am hungry. I kind of just want to get lunch eaten. And I can always fry the bologna in a future meal. I like a lot of mustard on my bologna sandwiches. I only got these chips for the days that I have a bologna sandwich, so I really only need them for 3 days. But I'll try to spread them out. I'm gonna put a couple on the sandwich too. I'll try to spread them out so that maybe if I want a snack on one day, I can still have a snack. Otherwise, I didn't really have anything to go with the sandwich if I didn't get some kind of a chip or something on the side. I didn't include any snacks. I didn't really include any drinks, no coffee. $21 just really isn't enough for those kinds of niceties. As much as I would like to have included them, it just wasn't possible, and still have a week's worth of meals. So, bologna sandwich for lunch it is. We do have some prep work to get done, and I do try to avoid using dry beans whenever possible because I understand that having to take the time to sort them, soak them, and cook them is just not something that everyone can do. But it is hard to deny how much cheaper dry beans are. 1 pound of dry beans cost about $1, but 1 can of beans is $1.35. Once cooked, 1 pound of dry beans is equivalent to 4 cans, and you can freeze them once they've been cooked. So if you have the time to cook 1 pound of dry beans once or twice a week, it can be a really good savings tool. Now when it comes to sorting the beans, I just pour a little bit out onto a plate and then I briefly check them for any pebbles or rocks. I also go ahead and remove any shriveled beans and then I put them in a large pot, cover them up with 2 inches of water and 1 tablespoon of salt. Adding salt when soaking them helps to soften the beans, which makes them quicker to cook and easier to digest. Give this a stir, cover it, and let it sit at room temperature overnight. So I promise you guys that I try not to do anything unnecessary or extra, but one of the reasons that I bought frozen mixed vegetables is because they're higher quality than canned vegetables. Canned vegetables would have been about 67 cents a can. So technically speaking, I could have gotten a can of green beans, a can of corn, a can of peas, and a can of carrots, and I would have come out to about the same price. But by doing mixed vegetables, I get all of those vegetables in their frozen form, which is a little bit higher quality. So I am going to take the time to sort them into their individual components because you don't always just want mixed vegetables. Because like if I make fried rice, then I might only want the carrots or the peas, and I might only want the corn in a chowder. It makes sense in my head, so it's an extra step, but we're gonna do it. So this really was not that bad. It took me about 15 minutes in total, and the easiest way that I found to do it was just to pour a small amount of the vegetables out onto my cutting board, as you see here. And first I picked out all the green beans, then all the carrots, then I removed any peas, and then I was left with just corn. And if you've ever wondered about the ratios, it looks like it's pretty even. I would say that there's a little bit more corn and carrots than there are peas and green beans, but overall they're pretty much the same. And then I put those into little sandwich baggies for the freezer. Was that worth the work? Time will tell. But talking about a chowder kind of made me want to make a corn chowder for dinner, if for no other reason than to justify the 15 minutes I just spent sorting those vegetables. Oh yeah, and I only sorted one of the 2 bags. That's why those look pretty small portions. I'm unsure if I'm gonna sort the other bag or not. I want to see if this was worth it before I do it a second time. Now, most chowders have chunks of potatoes in them, but I didn't have any potatoes, only mashed potato flakes, so I figured in place of diced potatoes, we could make a potato dumpling or a basic kind of gnocchi. I started by making a very small batch of mashed potatoes, just the smallest increment listed on the box, which was 2/3 of a cup of water, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of margarine, 1/3 of a cup of milk, and 2/3 of a cup of potato flakes. Once my mashed potatoes were ready, I set those in a bowl and I set it aside to cool completely until I was ready to make dinner. Then at dinner time, I made my dumplings by putting a cup of flour or about a cup of flour onto my counter. I made a well in the center and I cracked in 1 egg. I whisked up the egg with a fork, kind of beginning to work in some of the flour, and then I poured the cooled potatoes on top. And using a baker's blade, I worked this all together into a dough. I kneaded this very briefly by hand because I've heard you don't want to overwork this dough or it can become gluey and gummy. This dough was very soft and tender and just a little bit sticky. But I patted it into a disc and then I cut that disc into strips and then I cut those strips into little chunks. And to keep them from sticking to each other or the counter, I did toss them very gently in some extra flour. Over on the stovetop, I heated 2 tablespoons of margarine and added 2 tablespoons of flour to make a roux, and once that was heated through, I added 4 cups of water. The first cup you want to add a little bit at a time, and then the rest of it you can just dump in. I also added 1 cup of milk, 1 tablespoon of chicken bouillon powder, some Cajun seasoning, maybe about a teaspoon or so, and some black pepper. I did not add salt, and that was a good choice because this bouillon is pretty salty. The Cajun seasoning I picked does have some salt in it, but not a lot. Then in went my corn that I had set aside, and I brought this mixture up to a boil, and once boiling I began dropping in my dumplings just a few at a time, trying to drop them in different spots in the pot so that they don't clump together. Give this a gentle stir and let it simmer until the dumplings start to float to the top, and that is dinner number 1 for the week. Looks like we're having dinner together, and as you can see, we made something of a gnocchi soup with corn and a creamy sauce. Kind of Cajun seasoning in there. I tried the broth, of course, because I have to try it for seasonings. And the broth is superb because we did that roux. It has a really nice thick and creamy texture. I am excited to try my homemade gnocchi though. I guess gnocchi is essentially a potato dumpling, which is more or less what I made. But I know gnocchi has a little bit more nuances than just potatoes, flour, and eggs. Those are perfect. They're so light and tender. I am thrilled with how this turned out. As you can see, I have a whole nother bowl's worth in there, so I can definitely have this for lunch tomorrow as well. And I don't even know if you would consider this a criticism, but the only thing that I have to say is that the gnocchi themselves are quite bland, but the soup has a lot of flavor to it, the broth has a lot of flavor to it, so I feel like the gnocchi being bland really isn't that big of a deal. It really is just there to be kind of a belly filler, but I do feel like maybe I should have seasoned the gnocchi a little bit, at least with some extra salt in it, because they don't really have much flavor. What a great start to the week, to be honest with you guys. This is amazing. Still proud of how my soup turned out. I am starting the second day with the utmost confidence. For breakfast today, I'm making a very simple breakfast sandwich with a fried egg and a slice of fried bologna. I fried the egg first in just a touch of margarine and oil, and then I fried the bologna second. I did cut a slice into the bologna so that it didn't curl up as it fried, and I very lightly toasted the bread. And then when I assembled the sandwich, I put a pretty decent amount of mustard on it. Good morning. It is the second day. I've been thinking about this bologna sandwich all night. I don't know why, but I'm really excited for it. And if the audio seems a little bit different in this video, it's because I'm testing something out. And you guys will have to let me know what you think of this filming style and all of it. This particular camera that I'm using seems to have a very directional microphone, meaning that when I'm standing in front of it, as I am now, it seems to pick up the audio pretty fine. But if I'm behind it or in any other direction, it's not as good, which is why this has more voiceover clips than my normal content does. Let's try our fried bologna breakfast sandwich. This is so simple, but so delicious, and this is the type of breakfast that I would eat on a normal day, even outside of one of these series. Honestly, I never really thought about bologna for breakfast, and I'm kind of sad that I hadn't until now. And I do think it was a really good call putting mustard on this because I feel like it really amplified the flavors. I didn't salt or pepper the eggs, if you notice, because of the bologna. The bologna is a little on the salty side, or at least I thought it was when I had my bologna sandwich for lunch yesterday. But I also had 2 slices on it, and I had potato chips too. So there was a lot of salty elements going on there. This time I didn't salt or pepper anything, but I did add mustard, and that was such a good choice. This is delicious. Now it's time to cook our big old pot of beans. It's not really a big pot. The pot is big, but the beans, 1 pound. It's time to cook our 1 pound of beans. So as you recall, yesterday we started soaking our beans, and this is what we've got the next day. We can drain them and rinse them. And since I'm going to be cooking them in the same pot, I went ahead and gave that a good rinse as well. Put them back into the pot and then cover them with 2 inches of fresh water. I am also only seasoning them with salt right now. I will add more seasonings when I go to cook with them later, but I want to keep them pretty neutral for now. Bring this up to a boil and let it boil for 10 minutes. This is a more important step when cooking things like kidney beans, but it's generally a good practice to have overall. After 10 minutes, reduce the heat to low and cover and simmer your beans for about an hour. After an hour, mine were tender and almost slightly overcooked, so you might want to check on them after 45 minutes and see if they're done. I just checked to see if they mash easily. And then I divide my cooked beans and liquid between 4 containers, and now we have our beans ready to go for the week. Each of these containers is equivalent to 1 can of beans. So for lunch today, I'm going to have the rest of the soup that I had for dinner last night. I'm probably just going to heat it up, maybe on the stovetop, maybe in the microwave. I didn't intend for that one to make so many servings. I actually have 3. So the one I had for dinner last night plus an extra 2 containers. I didn't intend to make that much, but once I had made the dumplings and realized how many dumplings I had, I was like, well, maybe I should just double or triple kind of the base recipe that I had in my mind. So I doubled it and ended up with a lot of soup. And one little trick, when you're reheating soup particularly, if you find it's a little thin the next day, you can always add a small amount of mashed potato flakes and that will thicken it back up. Not really much to show here, but I just wanted to show the adding of the mashed potato flakes to thicken up the soup. I do it a little bit at a time. Just remember, if you add too many mashed potato flakes, you're no longer going to have soup, you're going to have instant mashed potatoes. So just add a little bit at a time and then give it a couple of minutes to rehydrate before you add any more. I am curious to know how well this reheated, specifically the little dumplings. Hopefully they're not gummy or anything the next day. I do feel like I made some of them a little big, so just keep that in mind when you're making the dumplings. Try to make them a little small because they're going to puff up as they cook. Yeah, these dumplings are huge. To my surprise, this reheated really well. The dumplings are not gummy or gluey in any sort of way. It tastes just as good as it did when it was fresh. I think this reheated great, so that's a win. I feel like this got spicier. That Cajun seasoning can pack quite the kick, so maybe be a little bit less heavy-handed with it than I was, but I feel like once this sat in the fridge overnight, it definitely got spicier because my nose is running trying to eat this. We are going to be using some of our cooked beans for dinner tonight, but one thing to know about me is I don't particularly enjoy eating beans. I like to kind of take them and transform them into something else. With that being said, the vision that I have for this night's dinner is kind of loosely based on a dish called a pupusa. There are variations of pupusas that are just bread, and then there are variations that are stuffed with other things. A lot of cultures have a dish like this, like kolaches are bread with a stuffing in them. Then you have things like bao dumplings. There are bean cakes and things like that. So that's essentially what we're making. I'm using pupusa as an inspiration, but there's a lot of different cultures that have a variation of this meal. Now, a traditional papusa would typically be made with cornmeal, but I didn't have any, so I'm just going to use a standard flour tortilla recipe, and the recipe that I'm using is from Inspired Taste. I am cutting the recipe in half though because I need to make this flour last me all week. So into a bowl, I added 1 cup of flour and 2 tablespoons of melted margarine. Give this a stir and the mixture should look crumbly. In a separate bowl, mix a 1/4 cup of water with a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and microwave this for 30 seconds. It should be warm and the salt should be fully dissolved. Add half of the water into your flour to begin with. You don't want to add too much, and then once it's fully mixed in, if you need to add a little bit more water, you can. But you want this dough to be slightly sticky but not too wet. Lightly flour your countertop and then knead the dough by hand for 3 to 5 minutes, and you should have a really nice smooth dough ball, and then cover this and let it rest for 30 minutes. The resting step is important as it helps the dough roll out easier. While the dough rests, I began working on the bean filling. I melted a couple tablespoons of margarine in a skillet, and then I added 1 of my containers of cooked beans along with the liquid. I seasoned this with some Cajun seasoning, a little bit of the garlic and herb seasoning, and just a dash of chicken bouillon. And I do mean a dash because we've already got salt in the bean liquid and I didn't want this to be overly salty. As it started to simmer, I started to mash it with the back of a spoon, and I continued to let it heat through, and I continued to mash it until I got a very, very thick paste. I transferred this paste back into the container and then I set this in the fridge to cool completely. So now back to our dough ball, which I divided into 6 even portions. I'm only using half for tonight's dinner, so for each of the 3 balls, I rolled them out into rounds. I scooped some bean paste into the center, and then I folded in the edges to seal it. I pressed this gently into a disc, and I repeated this for all 3. The other 3 remaining dough balls I rolled out as thin as possible, and I laid them between sheets of wax paper. These can be stored in the fridge and will be cooked as flour tortillas when I make breakfast tomorrow morning. Then I pan fried my little pupusas in a little margarine until they were nice and brown on each side, and that was dinner number 2. I always feel the need to clarify that while I'm using pupusas as an inspiration for this dish, of course, I am in no means claiming authenticity of any kind. There's nothing authentic that's going to come for $21 from Dollar General, but I digress. I am excited to try these little bean patties though. They look really good. They got a nice browning. This is the busted up one. But you can see that they got nice and brown both sides. That's what it looks like on the inside. So it's just bread and beans, but the beans are really flavorful. So I imagine that this is gonna be good because those beans that I made were really good. Never be afraid to branch out and try some new things, especially if you're using the same ingredients and just preparing them in different ways. All right, I'm gonna get some hot sauce on that. I think that they're great. They're probably not the best thing I've ever made or ever had, but they kind of just taste like refried beans in a tortilla, like a thick tortilla, kind of pan fried or grilled, if you can imagine that. But it presents really nicely, and I think it's unique. A lot of times I kind of fall into the rut of having the same meals over and over and over again, and so this is just a fun way to change it up. I do think it is good both with and without the hot sauce. I almost kind of prefer it without the hot sauce, but I do like the heat. And I think this would be really great with some like Taco Bell sauce. If you've got a rogue packet or 2 lying around, I think you could throw something like this together and it would be really good. So that's a wrap of days 1 and 2. I'm gonna upload this video on Tuesday, and then the next upload will be on Friday, so that will cover days 3, 4, and 5, and then we'll do days 6 and 7 separately as well. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think we're off to a really great start and I'm so excited for the rest of the week and what kinds of meals we can make. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day and I will see you again soon.